On a rainy Thursday afternoon in early March, Eleanor Hayes stepped off the city bus with a canvas tote slung over her shoulder and a faded umbrella in hand. She was used to people looking through her like glass. Her jeans were worn at the knees, and her brown wool coat was stitched at the elbows where the fabric had thinned. But she held her chin high, always had. Life hadn't handed her much, but she carried what she had with grace. Downtown was glossier than usual, wet pavement catching the light from boutiques and cafes like puddles of glass. Eleanor squinted up at a building she'd never had reason to enter before, Revell Jewelers, all gold-plated lettering and spotless windows displaying diamonds that sparkled like snowflakes under halogen lights. She hesitated outside the store, her reflection caught between mannequins wearing necklaces that probably cost more than her car had before it died 3 winters ago. She hadn't wanted to come, but the chain on her necklace, her late mother's pendant, had snapped 2 nights ago. She'd meant to fix it herself, but the clasp was delicate, and she was afraid of making it worse. Eleanor had heard Revell's was reputable. She figured she'd ask how much it would cost, maybe get a quote. She wasn't expecting kindness, just basic decency. The door chimed softly as she stepped inside, the warmth of the shop quickly enveloping her. She blinked at the sudden change in lighting, brushing a few droplets of rain from her sleeves. Everything inside was polished, luxurious, and quiet. So quiet. 2 women stood behind a marble-topped counter, both impeccably dressed. One had icy blonde hair in a tight bun, the other wore a black blazer that screamed money. They both turned toward Eleanor as if she'd tracked in something foul. "Can I help you?" the blonde asked, voice clipped, already skeptical. Eleanor stepped forward slowly, producing the small velvet pouch from her tote. "Yes, hi. I have a necklace I'd like repaired, just the chain broke, but the pendant is real gold. It was my mother's. Sentimental, mostly." The brunette leaned over to peer at the necklace, but didn't touch it. "We don't do costume repairs," she said flatly. "It's not costume," Eleanor began, a bit confused. The blonde sniffed. "This is Revell's. We specialize in high-end jewelry. Pieces start at 5 figures. We don't service items like that." Eleanor's hands curled slightly. "I understand, but I thought you might." "Ma'am," the brunette interrupted, her voice lowering like a curtain. "Our clients don't come here to haggle over broken chains." A customer, an older woman in pearls, glanced over, watching the scene unfold. Eleanor felt her cheeks flush. "I'm not here to haggle," she said, quieter now. "I just wanted to ask." "We're not the place for you," the blonde said firmly. "You might try somewhere more appropriate." There was no mistaking it, the smirk, the glance at Eleanor's coat, the way her voice turned up at the end like she was doing Eleanor a favor by humiliating her nicely. Eleanor nodded, lips pressed tightly. "I see." She turned and walked out, still clutching the pouch, heart pounding with that cold, sharp ache she hadn't felt in years. Not since the days she begged landlords for a few more weeks, eaten canned soup so her son could have fresh fruit, or stayed up sewing missing buttons on donated shirts. Outside, the rain was still falling. She stood under the awning for a moment, watching the people pass, women in cashmere, men in suits, shoppers with sleek umbrellas. She wasn't ashamed of who she was. But in that moment, surrounded by glass and gold and polite cruelty, she felt like the dirt beneath their heels. She never even noticed the black town car that had been idling across the street. From the back seat, a man with sharp blue eyes had been watching the shop the whole time, his gaze following her from the moment she stepped in. He didn't look away as the door shut behind her, nor when her shoulders sagged just slightly as she re-entered the rain. He reached for his phone, his jaw tight. "Find out who just spoke to her," he said. "And don't tell them why." Eleanor didn't tell Daniel what happened at Revell's. That night, she made dinner like always, pan-seared salmon with garlic rice and steamed asparagus. She lit a candle, even though it wasn't a special night, and tucked a napkin into the collar of Daniel's shirt like she always did when he was reading the paper and forgot to eat right away. It was just them, in their quiet house nestled in the hills just outside the city, where the view stretched into a blanket of lights. It wasn't that she was hiding it. It was just, what was there to say? She'd been humiliated by a pair of snooty saleswomen in a jewelry store. People got judged all the time. It didn't define her. But still, when Daniel reached for her hand mid-dinner and said, "You okay today, honey?" she hesitated. "I'm fine," she said, brushing a lock of graying hair behind her ear. "Just saw something that reminded me of Mom, that's all." Daniel nodded. He didn't push. That was one of the things she loved about him, how his silence was never cold, only patient. Understanding. But Eleanor knew he'd seen something in her eyes. Daniel Prescott was not what people expected when she told them she was married. Most never got that far, anyway. They saw her, in her second-hand sweaters and scuffed boots, and assumed she lived a small life. That she belonged behind a cash register or managing a local diner. And once upon a time, she had. She'd raised her son as a single mother, working double shifts and praying the transmission on her car would last just one more winter. Meeting Daniel had been an accident. Literally. 2 years ago, she rear-ended his Mercedes outside a hardware store in the rain. He'd stepped out, tall and calm, holding an umbrella over her head while she apologized a dozen times. Then he'd noticed the box of canned goods and blankets in her back seat, donations for the women's shelter she volunteered at, and he smiled like he was seeing something most people missed. She hadn't known then who he was. Not until much later. And by then, it didn't matter. To Eleanor, Daniel wasn't a billionaire. He was the man who walked barefoot through the garden with her at dawn. Who sang terribly in the shower. Who brought her hot tea when her migraines got bad and ran her baths even when she insisted she was fine. Still, he was also the man who could buy anything. Change anything. And sometimes, Eleanor forgot just how powerful that made him. The next day, Eleanor went about her routine. She baked muffins for the shelter. She visited her neighbor, Mrs. Dunley, who was recovering from hip surgery. She stopped by the florist to buy fresh tulips for the kitchen window. She didn't mention Revels to anyone. But Daniel hadn't forgotten. At exactly 9 a.m., Revel Jewelers received an unexpected call. The man on the other end spoke with the authority of someone used to being obeyed. By noon, the boutique's owner, an aging Frenchman named Laurent Dupont, had been summoned to a private meeting at a downtown hotel. The offer was simple, though no less staggering. A full buyout of Revel Jewelers. All locations. Immediate transfer of ownership. No negotiations, the man in the tailored suit said. Mr. Prescott wants it by the end of the week. Prescott? Laurent echoed. As in Daniel Prescott? The man didn't reply. He only slid the contract across the table. Eleanor, meanwhile, had no idea. That afternoon, she stopped by a local repair shop, a family-owned place off 8th and Langdon. The old man behind the counter, Mr. Morales, squinted through his glasses and smiled warmly when he saw the necklace. "Oh, this is a beauty," he said. "Delicate work. Shouldn't take more than a couple days." She thanked him, her heart lighter. It reminded her that kindness still existed, even if you had to look harder to find it in some places. That night, as she folded laundry in the den, Daniel watched her from the doorway. She wore one of his old flannel shirts, sleeves rolled up, humming to herself as she sorted socks. The domesticity of it, the gentleness, it broke something in him. "Eleanor," he said, voice low. She looked up, eyebrows raised. He crossed the room, cupped her face in his hands, and kissed her forehead. "I don't tell you enough," he murmured. "But I see you. Every part of you." She blinked, caught off guard. "Where's this coming from?" He smiled softly, but there was steel under it. "Just a reminder." She didn't press. She just leaned into his chest and let herself be held. 3 days later, Ravel's was closed for inventory and renovation. The boutique was stripped of its window displays. The gold lettering removed. Behind the scenes, both the blonde and brunette saleswomen were called into HR meetings they didn't expect. Their tone was smug, until the new owner's name was revealed. And by the end of the week, Ravel Jewelers had a new name. Eleanor's. The grand reopening was set for Saturday. What neither Eleanor nor the public knew was that Daniel wasn't just opening a jewelry store. He was preparing a reckoning. The morning of the grand reopening dawned with a sky so clear it almost felt staged. Sunlight spilled down the polished windows of what was once Ravel Jewelers. But the name above the door had changed, now it was simply Eleanor's, in elegant cursive script. A crowd had already begun to gather on the sidewalk. Social media had caught wind of the change in ownership, and rumors swirled. Some said a billionaire had bought the place for his wife, others claimed a scandal had ousted the old management. Eleanor herself had no idea what was happening. She stood in front of her closet, still barefoot in pajama pants, holding up a long-forgotten dress, simple navy blue, with a neckline she hadn't worn since her son's wedding. Daniel stood behind her, freshly shaven, adjusting his cufflinks with deliberate care. "Tell me again," she said slowly, turning toward him. "Why are we going downtown this morning?" Daniel met her eyes in the mirror. "Because something important is happening," he said, lips curving slightly. "And you're the guest of honor." That cryptic smile again. It wasn't until they pulled up in front of the boutique and Eleanor saw the name, her name, etched into the glass, that her breath caught in her throat. "Daniel," she whispered, turning to him. He opened her car door without a word and held out his hand. Photographers, journalists, influencers, they all turned as she stepped out, confusion rippling through the crowd as cameras clicked. Who was this woman? She wasn't dressed like the wives of CEOs. No designer bag, no couture. Just clean lines, a soft wool shawl, a quiet grace. Inside, the boutique had transformed. Gone were the icy whites and cold marble. The new space was warm, filled with soft lighting, velvet-lined cases, and hand-painted artwork from local female artists. A framed photograph of Eleanor's mother sat beside the front register, her necklace proudly displayed on a custom stand. Eleanor turned in slow circles, speechless. And then, there they were. The blonde and the brunette. Standing near the back, now dressed plainly in black, no longer holding court behind the counter but instead watching everything with wide, pale eyes. When Eleanor met their gaze, they froze. Recognition flickered first. Then disbelief. They looked at Daniel, then back at her. Horror spread across their faces like a slow-burning flame. The blonde tried to speak first. I didn't know." Eleanor didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She walked slowly toward them, heels clicking softly on the warm oak floor. The crowd fell into a hush, sensing something real, something human unfolding. "You don't remember me," Eleanor said gently. "But I remember you." They didn't answer. Couldn't. "I came in here with a broken chain," she continued. "My mother's necklace. I wasn't asking for much. Just some help. You looked at me like I was something stuck to your shoes." The brunette swallowed. "It was a mistake." Eleanor tilted her head. "Yes. It was." She glanced at Daniel, who gave her a small nod. "I didn't ask for any of this," she said, motioning around the store. "But my husband, he believes in justice. And in me." The blonde's voice cracked. "Are we being fired?" Eleanor didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked at the crowd watching from behind the jewelry cases, all those curious eyes waiting to see how power would be wielded. "No," Eleanor said at last. "You're not being fired." Relief flashed over their faces, too quickly. "You're being reassigned," she added. "To a new program we're launching, community outreach. You'll be managing walk-in repairs, helping low-income families restore heirlooms and wedding bands. We'll be working with the women's shelter I volunteer at. Their smiles evaporated. You'll be trained, of course, she added, her voice calm. But if you speak to anyone the way you spoke to me that day, you'll be out on your last paycheck before the week ends. Understood? Neither of them spoke. Eleanor turned away from them and walked toward the center of the boutique, where Daniel had set up a small podium. He nodded toward her. They want to hear from you, he murmured. She stepped up, heart pounding. I don't have a speech, she began, her voice trembling slightly. I'm not here because I'm wealthy or powerful. I'm here because I remember what it's like to be invisible. To be dismissed. Murmurs moved through the crowd like wind through grass. This store is for people who've been told they don't belong. Who've been looked down on because of how they dress or what car they drive or what neighborhood they live in. This isn't just a jewelry store anymore. This is a place where people are seen. Her eyes welled as she looked at Daniel. And I have him to thank for that. He came to her side and took her hand, gently. The applause started softly. Then it grew. It filled the room like thunder. And through it all, Eleanor stood tall, not as someone who'd been given a store, but as someone who had earned every inch of that moment. Because kindness isn't weakness. And dignity doesn't wear a label. The following weeks passed in a quiet, surreal blur. The headlines were relentless: billionaire's wife reclaims her dignity, and a jewelry empire. The story took off across social media, the footage of Eleanor's speech going viral. But while the world buzzed with hashtags and sound bites, Eleanor herself remained unchanged. She still brewed her tea in the mornings the same way. Still went to the shelter every Tuesday. Still sent handwritten thank you cards to the staff who helped her run the newly named boutique. She wore the same shoes. Carried the same canvas tote. What changed was not Eleanor, but how the world looked at her. People started to recognize her in cafes, at the farmer's market, in line at the pharmacy. Some would approach gently, unsure. You're the woman from the jewelry store, right? And she always smiled and said, yes, I am. There was something disarming about her humility, how she made people feel safe, even in their curiosity. She never boasted. Never mentioned the money or the headlines. Only ever said she hoped people remembered to treat each other better. But behind the scenes, she was changing lives. The outreach program she launched grew quickly. Within a month, they were repairing dozens of heirlooms a week, rings bent from years of wear, bracelets belonging to grandmothers now gone, watches handed down through generations. Some were priceless. Others were worth pennies. But to the people who brought them in, they were everything. Eleanor's policy was clear: no one would be turned away because of how they looked, what they earned, or how they spoke. And as for the two women who had once turned her away, they changed, too. Not right away. The blonde, Stacy, took it the hardest. She'd been raised in a world that equated appearance with value. Her first few days in outreach were rough. She rolled her eyes. She muttered under her breath. She didn't want to be there. But something happened when a little boy brought in his mother's broken wedding ring. He was maybe 10, and his mother had passed away. He said he just wanted to wear it on a chain, so he could feel close to her again. Stacy didn't speak for the rest of the afternoon. The next day, she stayed late to learn how to solder fine gold. The brunette, Monica, apologized to Eleanor in private. Sincerely. She said the humiliation had haunted her more than she expected. That being confronted with the reality of her own cruelty had been a mirror she didn't want to look into, but needed to. Eleanor listened. She accepted the apology. And that was that. No revenge. No public shaming. Just quiet accountability. Months later, on a rainy morning not unlike the one when it all began, Eleanor returned to the store alone. The shop wasn't open yet. She liked it that way. She liked the silence before the world rushed in. She wandered through the showroom, stopping at the window to look out at the street. The same sidewalk where she'd stood, wet and humiliated, thinking she was small. Now, a new display sat in that window. Not diamonds. Not gold. Just a single, elegant frame. Inside it was a handwritten quote from her mother's old journal. Character is what you show when no one's watching. Grace is how you respond when they are. Eleanor stood there a while, just breathing. She thought about the girl she used to be. The girl scrubbing dishes in the back of a diner, counting tips, praying the rent check wouldn't bounce. The woman who cried into her steering wheel more nights than she could count. She thought about the Eleanor who walked into Ravel's, clutching her mother's necklace like it was a lifeline. And then she thought about this Eleanor. The one who owned a building, not because of her name, but because of her heart. Behind her, the door opened gently. Daniel stepped in, shaking off his umbrella. He looked at her, the way he always did, like she was the whole world in one person. "They're here," he said softly. "The first clients of the day." Eleanor turned. Smiled. "Let's open the door." Together, they walked toward the entrance. The lock clicked. The light above the sign flicked on. And Eleanor's, once a symbol of exclusion, became a sanctuary. Not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been underestimated. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and share it with your friends. It really helps the channel grow, and I truly appreciate it. Thank you.